All right, today we're diving into a really intense and deeply personal story. This is one father's 8-year fight to figure out why he's estranged from his son, and we're going to walk through the trail of evidence that he believes tells the whole story. And that question you just saw, that's really the heart of this entire story. For the father we're talking about, this isn't just about pain. It's the starting point of a massive, years-long investigation to try and piece together a puzzle from his point of view. So the man asking that question is Mark Edel, the father, and for him, this has been a nearly decade-long quest to reconnect with his son Joshua. He's been digging through old court documents, medical records, and a lot of painful memories to uncover what he calls the truth. So let's get right into the painful mystery here. For years, Mark Edel says he had this amazing bond with his son, and then, poof, it was gone. He believes the reasons it all fell apart are buried in a long history of conflict, neglect, and what he sees as manipulation. At the absolute center of the father's account is his son's mother, Tekla Sola. He alleges that a major conflict between her professional life and her personal actions is really the root cause of why he was pushed out of his son's life. And here it is. This is the core of his claim of a conflict of interest. According to him, the mother worked as an official court reporter for Judge Alan Rubenstein, the very same judge who was presiding over their custody battle. The father believes this professional relationship just fundamentally skewed the whole legal process against him. Now, according to the father, this wasn't your typical custody dispute, not by a long shot. He lays out some really serious allegations against the mother, claiming there was this whole pattern of behavior designed to completely undermine his role as a dad, and, he argues, to endanger their son's well-being. And this is a really key part of his argument. He truly believes that her job in the court system basically gave her a shield. He alleges that medical professionals, who maybe should have reported suspected neglect, just didn't, because they were afraid of the professional fallout. Okay, so let's rewind to the summer of 2003. According to the father, everything just exploded. I mean, look at this timeline. In just a matter of months, his personal life gets turned upside down, a custody agreement is signed, and then he says it's immediately challenged, and, most critically, his infant son suffers 2 separate head injuries. And that brings us to what the father presents as the smoking gun, the most compelling and disturbing evidence he found. Years after the fact, he's going through his son's medical records, and he uncovers details about 2 traumatic brain injuries his baby son sustained while in the mother's care. I'm going to read this right off the slide, because the details here are just, wow. These are the notes from the pediatrician describing the symptoms of the second injury. The father claims he had no idea how severe this incident was until he pulled these records himself, a full 5 years later. So here's where it all comes to a head for the father. On one side, you have the mother's reported story for the injury, that the infant, who wasn't even walking yet, fell from a single 6-inch step. And on the other side, you have these incredibly severe neurological symptoms that were written down by the doctor. So you gotta ask, right? Do the symptoms actually match the story? That's the question that has haunted this father ever since he found that medical report. He argues that the severity of those symptoms just doesn't line up with a fall from such a small height, which leads him to suspect a cover-up of what really happened. And he backs this up by pointing to everything that didn't happen. Think about it. He says there was no 911 call, no trip to the ER that was just 10 minutes away. Instead, an appointment was made for later that day at a doctor's office much farther away. To him, this looks like a deliberate series of choices made to avoid creating an official paper trail that would have definitely triggered an investigation by Child Services. Now, in the father's mind, these early injuries weren't just isolated one-off events. No, he draws a straight line from what he calls this early neglect to years of behavioral issues and, eventually, the complete destruction of his relationship with his son. He points to things like his son getting kicked out of daycare for aggression, his struggles with concentration, and a later diagnosis of ADHD. He's convinced these weren't just random childhood issues, but were actually potential long-term symptoms of post-concussion syndrome that stemmed from those early brain injuries. And this quote from him really just hits you, doesn't it? He's saying this wasn't just about reading medical records years later. He felt like he was watching his son struggle right in front of him, feeling completely powerless as these behaviors just kept happening. And then there's this, another absolutely critical piece of his story. When his son was formally evaluated for ADHD years later, the father alleges that this critical medical history, the 2 traumatic brain injuries from when he was a baby, was never disclosed to the evaluating doctors. He believes that led to a flawed diagnosis. So, fast forward to today. Where are we now? The son is an adult, but for the father, well, this fight is far from over. This isn't just about the past for him. It's about what he feels is an ongoing injustice and a really desperate plea to reconnect. He describes this just heartbreaking cycle. He and his son will manage to connect just for a moment, only for the mother to find out, and he alleges she shuts it down immediately. This is the reality he says he's been living with, completely cut off from the boy he had a strong bond with for more than a decade.
You know, there's this one moment he describes in court that just perfectly captures the huge disconnect he feels. He hears the mother say to a court moderator, "A teenage boy needs his father." And his reaction? He says, "I died," mouth dropped as I'm sitting across from her hearing her bold-faced lies.
And really, that brings us to the core of it all. This is what it boils down to for him. The father says this isn't about revenge or anything like that. It's about his son having access to a history he believes has been deliberately hidden from him. This has been one side of a very complex story, and it ends not with a resolution, but with a father's unanswered plea for his truth to finally be heard.